All right, so welcome everybody. Sean Thibodeau, Pollard Memorial Library. I'm here with David Moloney, author of The Barker House, which came out this past spring during the pandemic, and is a story of interconnected stories that take place in a fictional, based on true correctional facility in New Hampshire that Dave worked at, and he's here to sort of talk about the book, and we're going to maybe just have a conversation about that. And there's not a huge crowd, so if folks have questions that they want to ask as it goes along, you can either put them in the chat or raise your hand by clicking the little blue hand on the right-hand side under participants, and I can call on you and you can ask questions directly to Dave. But this is sort of going to be like a intimate sort of meet the author on his back porch in the cold type of discussion. And I was excited to have Dave do a talk here at the library for his book when it came out, but the pandemic had other things to say. So I'm glad that we're doing a remote one, and I hope for the next one we'll be back in more normal times so we can greet him to a bigger in-person event where we're actually selling books that he can sign. So anyway, I'll say a little spiel about Barker House, and then hopefully that can start maybe a conversation with Dave about it. I was telling him that I read it a few months ago, and went back and sort of scanned through it a little bit. It's a gritty book. I think it's a very well written book. It's a very telling human portrait book. It's sort of derived on characters, and you can tell that there's a living presence of experience in the book. It's clear to me that the stories are interwoven, but and it does switch from first person to third person as it goes along. But a lot of the human experience in the book, and the blurring of the lines between jailer and inmate, in terms of mental health and addiction, and the way that the system really dehumanizes people on a bunch of different levels. He gets into all that. It's a really, really rich portrait, told mostly from the perspective of the correctional officers of the system as it stands right now, which is a pretty inhumane one. So I think it's an important book. I think it has even more resonance now that there's some spotlight on the criminal justice system in general, and I think it has the power to really touch people's hearts. Even though it's set in New Hampshire, I would also say, just as the Lowell guy, there's a lot of Lowell in the book. There's little details, one of the characters, I think, gives a T-shirt to a young friend of his time as a rec person. It was like a green T-shirt, and I was thinking, oh, Dave must have worked for Parks and Rec when he was in high school or something like that. And there's a Bridge Street McDonald's is in it, and some Centerville locations too. So that's fun too, to have a book that's professional. It's not about the locations necessarily, but the locations are familiar, and so that's another thing that really kind of made it hit home for me. It was a landscape that I was very familiar with. So I'm glad to have read it. I'm glad it's out there. I wish it would get a bigger audience than maybe it has. And so with that, I'll turn it over to David, and I could ask you questions, and I could talk about the questions I have about maybe some decisions that you made or didn't make. But I guess maybe just an overall talk about the writing process and maybe how it came to be, because I know it's at a certain point you had said it was going to be a book of short stories, and then it turned into a more interconnected novel. So maybe talk a little bit about that process, I guess I would ask.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for coming. And yeah, so when I first started working at the jail, I never anticipated writing about it. I really thought that was going to be my career. I had failed out of college, and I didn't really have many prospects going for me. And it was during the recession in, late 2007, 2008, and it was a good job. It had a good retirement, good pension. They were hiring, and no one else was hiring. But when I was in the academy, I remember the training director talking about how the way the public perceives corrections officers. So when we were doing visits and the public would come in, they would think us as like, lugs and sadists and, people that were hurting their loved ones while they were in there. And it's because of media and the way officers were portrayed in movies and TV shows. I always think of like Oz and so that was kind of in the back of my mind the whole time I was working there as a writer, thinking about how I could, write about this experience and show the public that there's more nuance to it. There are like human beings that work on the other side of the bars. And uh, and so when I left the jail, I went back to UMass Lowell and well, I went to Middlesex first for 2 years and then UMass Lowell, and I started writing this really long. I was reading a lot of Russian novelists, and so I had this. I was going to write this like 700-page like tome about this officer's career from day one until 30 years later, and it was actually O'Brien's point of view, who makes it into this book. And I had about 200 pages, and I realized it was so boring. It was long, and it was just there was nothing happening. I was really just it was just all verisimilitude, like it was just his daily life, um, and so I scrapped it, and I started writing these short vignettes with different characters, and it made me excited again about the project. I could bring in a cook, I could bring in a female officer, I could bring in someone on their way out and someone on their way in, the booking department, and so I wrote the short stories, and then I realized organically I was telling a narrative that was connecting them all. And so I spent a few months, with sticky notes, trying to figure out how they all connected somehow. And one of my favorite things in some of these books, and I always think of like the show Lost, the final episode when all the characters come together in like the church, right? And they're all like, and so a lot of books and TV shows do that, where they bring the whole cast together for a final like moment. It's very pleasing for a reader or a viewer. Jennifer Egan's Visit from the Goon Squad does that with the concert at the end, and uh, and so I wanted to kind of play on that, and so I wrote the final chapter with the softball tournament that brought all the
The
players.
underhand, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that brought them all back, and so technically that made it a novel, and I still don't really call it a novel. I call it a book. I don't really
Okay.
know. Like I don't know what it falls under. The publisher didn't label it anything. I didn't label it anything. But I would call it a novel in stories, I guess. Uh,
Okay.
but it's also kind of a worn out uh, uh, genre right now. It was really in a few years ago, and I think of like Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout,
Yeah.
which is very much interconnected stories, but I consider it a novel. Um, and so I'm kind of playing on that. I'm teetering that line. But I didn't care because I just felt like the book worked.
Yeah. I found when I was reading it, I started writing out a more detailed table of contents to help remind me of, and there's some characters too, like I kept getting the first guy, Menkins, mixed up
Mankin.
with Menser. Menkins and Menser, and then, O'Brien and Big Mike, for some reason, those two were pretty close. And so, like, laying it out with the table of contents as like the subtable of contents, I think helped me understand, like, because you say there are some characters that come in and out, and maybe even some of the more like poignant portraits are like, I'm thinking like Leon the cook, but he's sort of a one-off. Like he just gets his one chapter and then he's gone. And, you know, as a reader, like I didn't know whether I needed to carry Leon with me or look for him to come back, you know? And so the table of contents, I feel, helped me kind of map it out. So that would be my one main critique of the book. I want a more detailed table of contents, but I just made it on my own.
Yeah, we ditched the table of contents. That was intentional,
Okay.
because I trust readers. I think readers are very smart. A lot of readers are smarter than the writer, and I knew the reader would be able to handle it. Um, we did label each chapter with the narrator's name, and that was
Right.
something I didn't want. I wanted it to be even more spare, but the editor said no. This, like, we need to give them something. But I kind of like books where I pick up a new narrator and it takes me a page or two to figure out whose head I'm in.
Yeah.
But that's just me, and I realize that's not like the normal reader. But the like Mentor comes in like heavily, and then his demise is kind of just like glossed over towards the end. But I
Right.
feel like that is what happens in real life. You know, like when you work at a job for a few years with people and you become intimate with them, and then you decide to leave that job, and then a few years later you get a text or you see it in the obituaries and someone passes away. It's that same feeling of like, and everything rushes back at you, all your emotions, all your interactions with them, the could have beens. And
Yeah.
so I wanted that to happen to the reader. I wanted them to see Mensa gone and have that moment where like, oh no, Mensa, because that's how we are, and hopefully that worked, but it was a gamble trying to do that in a book like this.
So you just wanted like the title, the chapter titles, and no location or character name at the heading.
Yeah,
Okay.
but that
You're a
was,
true Faulkner. You're like,
I know.
just, you know, make them work, right?
I feel, yeah, I was, I was taught to be a close reader
Yeah.
and to read to read longer or put in more time than the writer put in to write it. And so, but like I said, that's me, English major. I know like the
Yeah.
general public needs or wants, some type of like, where are we now? And
Right.
so I get that. Uh,
I think as I was like wrestling with it, I'm thinking, well, maybe it's a statement that he's trying to say, you know, that, you know, the dehumanizing aspect of this job is something that, like, you know, the individual person doesn't really matter. And it's kind of like, and you get to that even on a sub level with like, there's no, except for the, like, the muses, the dialogues, you don't have any inmate oriented chapters or you know, perspectives. So they're even like a layer below that in like the dehumanizing nature of the institution. So yeah, I mean, I get it.
yeah, and that was something I was worried about. I had a friend of mine who said, like, you're really dehumanizing like an already marginalized population. But that was intentional again. Um, it's sort of when you're working in a place like that and with the revolving door of the minute you empty a bunk, there's a body in it. Like within 15 minutes, you empty a bunk, body in it, and you get caught up in your own issues and problems. That's how it is. They just become faces and they just become bodies. And I know that sounds terrible, but that's just the nature of that kind of work. You don't want to get close to somebody that you're going to have to write up or wrestle with, or overhear them talking about a crime they committed and then have to tell your supervisor, and then that ends up in court and then you testify against them. Like you don't want to get close with them. And so you kind
Yeah.
of just, you treat them as something um, other than you. And I know
And
that
they're not,
sounds bad, but
no, I mean, I don't know that there's like such a nuanced portrait of correctional officers. I don't know of one that's out there, you know, and you can kind of tell the truth because it's under the veil of fiction. Um, and you know, I think about like the work home balance that's ever present in this book too. And I wondered if you maybe talk about that, some of the ways that the job bleeds into, you know, the off work struggles of the officers, and how that kind of maybe even mirrors some of the you know, the inmates' experiences too. So
Yeah, I kind of wrote every chapter with an A-B structure. So A was work, B was home. And it's kind of because that's how we live, right? We have our work relationships, we have our home relationships. And that kind of work, it's not like an accounting job or even like construction. You think about it the entire time you're at home. You think about it when you're trying to fall asleep, but you can't talk to like your spouse about it or your friends because they just won't understand. Even if you try to explain all the context and emotion behind it, it's its own. The jail and the prison is its own ecosystem, and it's hard to explain unless you've been there. And so you just hold it all in. And one of the things we were taught is you have to leave your baggage at the door. And I always wondered, what door are they talking about? The door to the jail, the door to my house? And I still don't know the answer to that, because I brought home to the jail and I brought the jail home. And so I wanted to explore that in the book. And so that's why I kind of structured all the stories with like, they're in work, they're at home, they're in work, they're at home. Because that's how we live our lives anyways. I think it's very much a workbook. And I like books about work and jobs. And this is one of those jobs not a lot of people know much about.
right, and you know, you I don't think you get into like the reasons why people find themselves working in the correctional facility until like later in the book. You know, there's like some stuff about like, you know, people wanting to be police officers and maybe failing the test, but that doesn't happen until later. I mean, I think you hit it off with this, that Mencken's chapter is brutal, and like the idea of this, you know, these two inmates that are messing each other up, and the punishment that you know, the unique form of punishment that Mencken's kind of meets out, that flips the inmates. Like, well, one's trying to shave, right, and the other one's banging on the wall, and the guard knows that he's going to be in trouble if the guy who's banging himself on the wall hurts himself. So he has to let the guy who's shaving get him back into his cell so that he can address the guy who's banging his head on the wall. And then to punish him for doing that, he can't, you know, there's a limited, I don't know. It seems like he comes up with this way where when the prisoner's taking a shower, he just kicks open the door for the cold air to come in from the winter outside. And that ends up, at the end of the chapter, you're having the prisoner that, I forget his name, but who was shaving now is defending the guy that's getting tortured by the guard. And I thought it was this fascinating flip, you know, like they're backing each other up, but then also like they're all suffering in a great amount, the guards and the two prisoners. And it was just like this kind of brutal dance that I think you kind of encapsulated. As someone to admit here, but
Yeah.
I assume that was intentional. And I'm a terrible interviewer. I don't have a question for you.
No, it was. It's funny because that story was supposed to be the title story. In the beginning, it was called Distant Birds in Flight. And it was, there was a sub plot where Mencken's is going to AA and he meets sort of this love interest. And so that story was the longest story. And I had to cut that from like 35 pages down to like 11. And when I was doing that in revision, I realized the heat of the story was between that trio there, the two inmates and Mencken's, and the power struggles that he was going through. He had been working at a mental hospital before where a young juvenile died in his care. And he's never
Right.
obviously been treated for that. He's going to a mental health counselor, but that's because of his alcohol addiction. And the guy cares more about telling stories about girls and and drinking and less about his issues. And so
Right.
I that was kind of a comment on when a traumatic thing happens to officers, there is really no help offered. And so it comes out with a lot of men physically. And, instead of telling our emotions, we do it with an action. And so I wanted to show, like him making them cold and kind of suffering. And then that final scene where he dries the Hispanic man off with the towel is sort of like maybe a healing moment for him. But that was never intended. And the good thing was I had a good editor that told me, no, you went the wrong way with the story. You missed like the best part. Go focus back on that. And she was right.
Yeah. Because Mencken's, yeah, he's got that one off. And like you say, yeah, I was forgetting about the trauma and the flippant attitude for the counselor. I mean, a lot of the COs, it seemed like every other minute they're getting, in trouble for getting an OUI or, having trouble with their own personal lives. And so like mental health and addiction, is ever present in both the guards and the people in the jail. So I have a question from the audience, wondering about specifics of Dave's journey from before he failed out of college, how long he was at the jail, what level of offenders, county, state, when did he start writing at all, and this project, did you go back to school, et cetera, et cetera. People want to know about you, Dave.
Yeah, so I've been in Lowell my whole life. I grew up in Pawtuckaville public school. I went to Lowell High. And I took a creative writing class sort of as a joke my senior year. And the teacher kind of made me like a pet project because she really liked my writing. And all my ego needed was for someone to say I was good at something. And then I just dove completely headfirst in. I started with poetry mostly. And I did, Billy Collins says every poet has to write 1,000 bad poems before they write a good one. And I think I wrote like 5,000 bad poems. And so I just kind of was doing that. And I went to Salem State for English, but I went young. I wasn't even 18 when I moved into the dorm, and I was living with my 3 best friends from high school, and none of us did well. I was one of the first people in my family to go to college, and the only thing I knew about college was from the movies. I knew nothing of what to expect. And so I didn't, that's not an excuse, but I didn't do well at all. And so the next few years I worked in security at the Kraft food plant where they make the macaroni and dressing. And that's kind of all I was doing and working part-time. And then I started working at Tewksbury Mental Hospital as a counselor on the overnight shift. And I was really good at talking to people in distress. So if someone woke up in the night upset, I could coax them back into bed. And a lot of people would call out sick the next morning. And so they would ask me to stay to fill the head count. And so I would stay, and then I got really good at it. And within 6 months, I was the second shift supervisor at 20 years old. And I had no experience working in mental health, but I just knew how to talk to people. And I realized that's sort of my skill set, de-escalation, calming people down. And so I stayed there for a couple of years, 2 years, and I hit a wall or the ceiling. I couldn't move up without a degree. And I didn't want to go into psychology. Working in mental health is tough. And so the jail was hiring, and all they wanted was a high school diploma and a heartbeat. And so I signed up, and I never intended on working there. It was a county jail. It was Valley Street Jail in Manchester, New Hampshire. And it's the largest county in New Hampshire. So we fed from like Nashua and so it's all level of offenders. all county jails are pretrial inmates. So no matter what you did, you go to jail first while you are awaiting trial. And so it doesn't matter if you got a DUI or if you murdered 10 people, you're going to go to county jail until your trial. And then once you're sentenced, you go to prison, or federal prison. And so we had the range. And because of my mental health background, they put me on the maximum security unit, which is basically the hole where inmates live alone. They come out alone. Their cells are bare. There's nothing in there. They're not allowed anything because they've done something where they can't play nice with everyone else. And most of it's because of mental health issues. And they did not belong in county jail. They belonged somewhere else. But New Hampshire was treating county jails at the time as mental health hospitals because they didn't have any. And so you worked 30 days on the unit and got switched out just so you didn't form relationships, and you didn't, you need a fresh month. I stayed on there for almost 4 years. They never switched me out. And so the burnout happened quickly. I saw the worst of the worst every day. So that was when I got promoted to a field trading officer, and I told my wife if I didn't like it and if I didn't change my attitude after the promotion, I'd quit. And within like 2 weeks of the promotion, I quit with no backup plan at all. Just bought a house. My wife was pregnant, and I had no job. But it's because I physically and mentally could not do it anymore. And I signed up for classes at Middlesex, and I had to start from scratch. They wouldn't take my classes because they were almost 10 years old, and they wouldn't take the credits, whatever little credits I earned. So I started from nothing, and I did 2 years there and 2 years at Lowell, and I dove right in full time. I was working nights at bars, landscaping, balancing security, and then I did my master's program right after. And yeah.
Where'd you do your master's?
I did my Master's of Fine Arts at Southern New Hampshire University.
Okay.
They have a low residency program that's great. And now I teach there full time. I'm a full-time professor at Southern New Hampshire. So I'm back in Manchester, just in a different capacity, I guess. But I drive by the jail all the time.
You teach writing up there?
I teach creative writing, and I teach composition and rhetoric.
Okay.
So a 2 and 2.
There's a follow-up from Paul. He says, "Thank you so much, inspiring journey. Just bought the book, so you owe him an autograph." And he has to go to another meeting, and he wants to know how a Lowell-based wannabe writer can get in touch with you. Sounds like SNHU, maybe.
Yeah, or you can find me on Facebook. I mean, I'm on there. It's a public profile. So just find my name, David Moloney. Or I could have Sean, maybe when he posts the video, a contact. But I'm happy to do an autograph. And even if it's, distanced, I'll meet you and sign it. Thank you so much for coming and supporting. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Thanks for your great questions. This Zoom stuff is so strange.
Yeah.
It's awkward and amazing, but strange. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, yeah, the book came out in April, and so almost to the day the book came out, we decided to shut down the state. And so all of the bookstores, the books were just in boxes for months, and my entire book tour got canceled. I was doing a New England book tour. We had like 17 stores and libraries and universities set up, and I was supposed to do a reading at Brown University, which I kept joking, no Moloney has ever been on Brown's campus. And so it was a bummer I never even knew what Zoom was. I didn't even know this existed. And now I've done my entire tour on this, and it's not the same. I I haven't been able to shake someone's hand or sign a book or thank
Right.
them in person. So I get it. This does not replicate what we would be doing at the library.
Right. Yeah, and so Jim said he just bought the book he's looking forward to. So,
Thank
the
you,
same
Jim.
same arrangements can be made for autographs. I want to get my copy. I'll be honest. I pre-ordered a copy of the book, and I got it in the mail. I remember having it in my house, but then I just could not find it. Like, I don't know where the physical copy went. I don't know if one of my kids ate it or threw it out or something. I don't know. So I bought an e-copy, and I've been reading the library copy, but my actual hardcover I didn't repurchase. So maybe I have
Yeah,
to sign my e-reader.
I hired a gnome to go steal all the hard copies, so everyone has to buy another one just to make up for the book sales.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's such a bummer. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that your book tour got scuttled like that. And Bloomsbury is a big publisher too. So how did you do you have an agent? Did you send it out and have them send it out and that kind of thing through SNHU? Do they hook you up with that or?
No, I got an agent on my own during my master's program. One of my mentors, Tony Tulathamoody, who wrote a really great millennial novel called Private Citizens. He read my manuscript and he said, hey, stop messing with this. Let's get you an agent. And so I had a list of about 8 that were like my dream agents. And so I queried them, and he let me use him as a reference for the agency he's at, but just with a more junior agent, because he was like way up at the top. And it's at Trident Media Group in New York City. And a couple of days later, the agent asked me for the whole manuscript, and then right after Thanksgiving weekend that year, she asked to sign me, and so she's still my agent now. And she's great because we worked for about a year editing it together. And a lot of agents don't work as editors. They want a clean manuscript when they get it, and they want to be able to send it out that weekend. They don't want to have to deal with that kind of stuff. And I caught her at young enough in her career where she was building a client list. And so she spent a lot of time with me making it publishable and ready for submission. And she's great. So we had a sort of 15 big publishers, and Bloomsbury was on there, and they were really excited about the book, and that's what we wanted. We wanted somebody that cared about it, and not just, publishing's an industry. They want to make money.
Right.
And so we see that with sort of all these political books being published. They don't really care who's writing it. They want to know what the pre-orders are going to be. And
Right.
so I wanted a publisher that really cared about the book itself.
Yeah. And I do want you to talk about your influences and your reading lists and stuff too. But the book that I read right before I read this book, and I thought there were tons of similarities, and I haven't seen it in any written interview that you've given about an influence, but is Dennis Johnson. Like his book, The Largesse of the Sea Maiden. I don't know if you've read that.
Oh yeah, I read it.
And I think that I don't know if I could give a writer higher praise than to compare him to Dennis Johnson, but like this book reminded me it was that effortless and that like just gritty and hard won and simple too at the same time. And I was just so taken with it, and I thought the mirrors were like so interesting.
Wow, that's huge praise. My master's thesis was on Jesus' Son, which is Dennis Johnson's book of short stories. And I wrote about Dirty Wedding, which is one of my favorite short stories ever. So yeah, I love Dennis Johnson, and it's a bummer he's gone. But Train Dreams, if you haven't read his novella, Train Dreams is my favorite Dennis Johnson book.
Train Dreams is amazing. So is The Largesse. I don't know, for some reason I didn't even know Largesse had been published, and I think it came out like almost immediately posthumously from when he died. And
about a month after he passed.
Right. but I usually pick up, his stuff when it comes out. His longer stuff is a little bit more difficult, but when it's shorter, like the novellas and that, it's just so amazing, so powerful. So, what are some other influences and things that inspired this book and your writing life?
Well, Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried was probably the one that made me think about writing like a chorus of characters that are all dealing with the same issue. And A Visit from the Goon Squad with Jennifer Egan, I read it in a class at UMass Lowell, and I just always marveled at what that book did. I still don't know how it did what it did to me, because I reread it recently, and it wasn't as good as I remembered it to be. And so I don't know if it was just me at the time or whatever, but and Dennis Johnson, Jesus' Son, was definitely something I was reading at the time. I read a lot of the Best American Short Story anthologies that come out every year. And so I randomly bought like a bunch of different years. I bought like whoever the editor was. If like Raymond Carver was the editor, I bought that one. I think it was like 1984. And I bought the 1990. The minute I knew I was writing short stories, I consumed every short story I could. I subscribed to literary magazines like the New England Review, Tin House, Paris Review. I read every New Yorker story that came out that the week it came out. And Wells Tower, I don't know if you read him.
Yeah, the airport one. He talks about like rewriting that story with the brothers. I think the published form, or he rewrote it. It was published twice. I think.
Everything Ravaged, Everything Burned is his
right
collection.
Sorry.
Yeah, and some obviously Elizabeth Strout was a huge influence. Olive Kitteridge was something that made me think about the way characters come in and out of stories. That was a very New England book. It was a book that I saw a few times. I'd like rent the Beach House and I'd see it on the shelf, and it just looked like a book I wouldn't read. And I'm like, I'm not reading that. And then someone said, you have to read it. And I read the first story and I was like weeping after reading it. And I'm like, why did I not read? I definitely, I did that thing you're not supposed to do, is judge a book by its cover.
It wasn't marketed towards you. No, I get it.
It wasn't. And
I felt the same way. Yeah.
It's such a heavy, awesome book. I loved everything about, and a lot of Toni Morrison with her lyrical style, but that's mostly, and I had to not do lyrical prose in this book. I had to do that spare, Cheever, Carver, Fonte kind of prose, which was on purpose. But that's not how I enjoy to write. I like to do the more lyrical Faulkner, Toni Morrison kind of approach. But those are kind of my. Tessa Moshfegh is another one, because she writes these kind of grotesque characters, and warts and all. And I kind of do this in this book where it's like, I'm going to tell you about the nasty dreams this guy has about his wife, and you're going to know about it. So I kind of like how Moshfegh goes there with her characters. I guess those are. Rebecca Curtis is another one. So she's a New Hampshire writer, wrote a great 20 Grand was her collection.
I don't know that one. Olive Kitteridge, also one of the few instances of fictional Thibodeaux that I know characters in there. So that was like, hit home for me. Anyway, what are you working on, if anything? I saw that article you wrote for, was it Merrimack Magazine, about COVID and eating.
Oh yeah, that was the count. That was the counter. Yeah.
The counter. But are you working on other projects? What's going on in your writing life?
Yeah, I finished a collection of stories about people who live along the Merrimack River. in different capacities. So there's a woman that lives in the Lawrence Mills. I wrote about Tent City, people who live in sort of the, everyone from Lowell knows sort of the tent city. I guess every city kind of has one now.
Did you go down and interview people?
No, so I read a lot of Lowell Sun articles that came out in like 2016, 2017, when and there's and there's a lot of YouTube videos of a reporter from the Sun who is not there anymore, and I reached out to him and he kind of said he didn't want to talk about it, which was strange, but he posted a lot of videos on YouTube, like long ones. And so I got a lot from that, but I also grew up along the river my whole life, right near the bowling alley. So there's stories about kids fishing and growing up hanging out in the parking lot behind the alley, which is now a new market basket. But growing up, that was kind of where it was a big drinking spot for teenagers. And we always joked that there was a Native American burial ground back there, but it's actually the Coburns and Varnums.
I was gonna say, yeah.
And Native Americans didn't really bury their dead with tombstones and gravestones like we do, and so we were kind of naive. But so it's just kind of stories about the regatta and people growing up in the modular homes on Laurie Lane, and I just wanted to tell the story of 30 or 40 years of growing up on the river, and it's really different than what the river did for us with the mills and the production. We now treat the river very differently, and so I kind of explored how we treat it now in that collection.
Have any of those been put in print? Any of the individual stories, or?
Yeah, one was published in Paul Marion's anthology that just came out.
The Atlantic Currents?
The Atlantic Currents, yes. And so that's actually the first story in the collection. But the rest we're kind of holding because I'm pretty deep into a novel, and short story collections don't sell to publishers for a lot of money. And so the idea is to have a novel to go with it. And I didn't know that before I started writing it. I kind of just thought like, who cares what my next thing is? But that's why you have an agent. I guess the agent can tell you, hey, do you want $1,000 for the 2 years you spent on this? Or do you want to make more money when you finish the novel? It's like, okay, I'll hold it till I finish the novel, I guess. So we're kind of just sitting on it, and I'm trying to wrap up my second novel.
There's a comment from Shayla. I think it might be Shayla Hallisey. Did you have Miss Hallisey at Lowell?
I was going to ask if that was Miss Hallisey.
So she wrote, I loved your book, but hated that you lived that life. I also loved that spare writing style, but you made me look up a word descriptive of a scar. And that,
a cambered wound.
Cambered wound. Yeah, I looked that up today too.
If that is Miss Hallisey, I can't believe I made you look up a word.
You've made it, kid.
I still remember my vocab book and struggling through that. But yeah, no, a lot of, I guess, I know my mom said the same thing to me, and my neighbor, they like just wanted to hug me after reading the book, like, oh my God, I can't believe this. But not all of it happened to me. A lot of what happened, I put on other characters, and a lot of it I heightened for fiction. And so even though I think it's a true portrayal of what it's like to work at a jail, some of the things I turned up a little bit just because I could, I guess.
Yeah. So I think it is Miss Hallisey. Hi, Miss Hallisey.
Oh, hi, Miss Hallisey. I hope you're doing well.
Charged. I see her around. She's a good friend to the library, and last time I saw her, she was just as spark pluggy as she's always been. So it's so great to see her here. All right, it's 1:15. I know you got a wife zoomed in on the committee meetings, and the kids trying to get to bed and stuff. So unless you want to say anything else, the crowd is diminished. So she's fine, thanks. She said.
Oh, that's great. Yes, and I do owe you an autograph. You can't grade my cursive though. I've lost the I've lost my cursive. So
I don't think they teach cursive anymore.
they still did when I was. Yeah, I mean, I don't handwrite. I write everything on the computer. I've completely ditched the pen and pencil. I work so much better on this, and so now when they asked me to sign books, I was like, oh my God, this is not,
how do I do this?
This is embarrassing. So you can't grade me on it.
Yeah.
All right, Sean. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave, for taking the time. And, I hope when the novel's finished and it's published, we do a bigger event at the library. We'd love to have you.
I cannot wait. Can't wait to see people in person again. I left my office in March and I haven't been back, and I can't wait to see people.
All right. Well, hang in there and have fun. And it looks like Miss Halsey doesn't do cursive either. She retired her red pen. So
thank God. Okay.
All right, everybody.
All right.
Take care and be well.
Bye.
All right. Bye.